Pakistan International Airlines Flight 268 has crashed somewhere in the Himalayas. All 167 people on board have died. Within hours, the Nepalese government launches an investigation into the crash of Flight 268. Already stretched thin by the Thai Airways investigation, the Nepalese ask British investigators for help.
Thanks for coming, Andrew.
Andrew Robinson from Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch is one of the investigators assigned to the case.
Let's see what we're dealing with here.
The pressure is on the team to figure out what caused this accident as quickly as possible. The Nepalese government deploys the military to help investigators get to the remote crash site, which is more than 7,000 feet above sea level. The team begins examining the wreckage, but conditions are treacherous. Investigators quickly conclude that it's too dangerous to examine the wreckage on site. As the investigation gets underway, one thing is obvious: Flight 268's final altitude. Investigators plot the location and altitude of the crash site. Nepalese soldiers have retrieved the aircraft's black boxes from the wreckage of PIA Flight 268. The Digital Flight Data Recorder, or DFDR, contains information about critical aircraft operations and performance. The cockpit voice recorder records conversations between the pilots. Investigators hope the flight's black box data, back from Paris, will help solve the mystery. They look at the plane's flight path as the crew prepares for landing.
They started their descent. At 16 miles out, they're at 10,500 feet. Then down to 9,500 at 13 miles, 8,200 at 10 miles. Then quickly down to 7,500 until impact at 7,280.
The data reveals an astonishing fact.
So, 1,000 feet too low, right from the get-go.
The approach to Kathmandu is one of the last places on Earth a pilot would risk flying too low.
Wait a minute. There you go. Perfect match. They were flying the approach, but one step ahead.
He's adjusting his descent to hit the lower altitudes. It's no accident.
Investigators now hope the Pakistan Airways cockpit voice recording will shed light on what happened in the cockpit in the lead-up to the fatal collision. But as the team begins listening to the CVR, they get a gut-wrenching shock. The cockpit voice recording of PIA Flight 268 is playing the last thing investigators want to hear: silence. But then...
We are entering an area of turbulence, and I request all of you to remain seated.
The tape has recorded the announcements made to the cabin and conversations with controllers, but not the conversations between the two pilots. It's a major setback.
Back to the drawing board.
Without the full cockpit voice recording, investigators need to find other ways of understanding why the pilots of Flight 268 were flying 1,000 feet too low at every step of their approach. To avoid the mountains surrounding Kathmandu, pilots follow an approach chart about the size of a large postcard. It provides the specific altitudes pilots must take at set distances from the airport. They study the same chart used by the flight crew. Investigators need to know how the crew would have prepared themselves for the complicated approach. They examine the cockpit layout of an identical Pakistan International Airlines Airbus A300.
There's no place to clip an approach chart here. There is just here. Now only the captain can see it, and he'd have to keep turning his head. Unlikely they use that. More likely he put it here.
The other clip is a full 3 feet away from either pilot.
That's not much better. It's almost impossible to read, and that handle is blocking the descent profile.
They learned that Pakistan International Airlines has only 2 places for pilots to clip their charts. Both positions make it very difficult to read a 4-inch wide piece of paper. Then, quite by accident, the investigators discover a key clue regarding the pilot's misreading of the approach chart.
If you pick up the chart and happen to put your thumb over the 11,500 foot mark for 16 nautical mile marker, in that case, it might have guided his eye to the next height fix, and he might have assumed that that was the correct height for the 16-mile marker point.
This definitely makes it look like 10,500 is the correct altitude at 16 miles.
Robinson finally has a theory he can put to the test. Just a few minutes before impact, the first officer reports being 25 miles from the airport at the correct altitude of 11,500 feet. But when the captain looks at the approach chart, his thumb may have obscured the correct next altitude.
Here it is. Watch my levels.
Now, instead of maintaining 11,500 feet, Captain Janjua dials in the next altitude on the chart,
Descending to 10,500.
oblivious that his plane's approach is now one step ahead. The crew has now made a fatal mistake, unaware the airliner is now descending towards a violent collision with the side of a mountain. Investigators now pursue the new theory that the pilots of Flight 268 misread the altitudes on a cluttered approach chart. The team has a surprising realization. At the 16-mile mark, the first officer reports the altitude they should be at, 11,500 feet, instead of 10,500, the lower altitude they're actually at. The investigators have uncovered a new mystery that goes right to the heart of what went so horribly wrong.
Why did they descend to 10,500 and then report being at 11,500?
Andrew Robinson's team returns to the flight data, hoping to understand why the pilots of Flight 268 misread and misreported their approach altitudes before the crash.
A slat extension, a frequency change, and then flaps and landing gear.
He was a busy guy.
Investigators now believe that as the distracted flight crew approached 16 miles, their attention was consumed by the demands of the busy descent. Investigators think the first officer hastily misreports the altitude on the approach chart
11,500.
without double-checking his altimeter. Then, Captain Janjua is too busy to notice the discrepancy between the reported and actual altitudes.
We crossed over 8,500. 200 now.
Roger, clear for final.
Report 4 miles. Runway.
Both pilots seem to have made mistakes. Investigators believe they've finally developed an explanation for how the tragic accident unfolded. First mistake is made before the 16-mile marker, where the captain likely misreads the approach chart and enters the altitude for the 13-mile marker, one step ahead. Then, likely distracted by the busy approach, the first officer misreports their altitude. He reports where they should have been, not where they actually are. Investigators believe that if the captain had caught and checked that discrepancy, the flight's outcome might have been completely different. Flight 268 remains 1,000 feet below the recommended safe altitude for what's left of its fatal descent. In the end, if the plane had been just a few hundred feet higher, it would have missed the mountain and 167 lives would have been spared. In the aftermath of the Flight 268 tragedy, investigators make a number of recommendations to prevent another accident due to a misread approach chart. Chief among them is simplifying the Sierra approach itself to make it less complex and challenging. They also recommend installing air traffic radar at Kathmandu and suggest Pakistan International Airlines install clips on the control columns of all its A300 airplanes. A memorial to the victims of Flight 268 stands at the foot of the mountain where it crashed.